general words. I have some additional thank you, or same thank yous as at the beginning, but maybe not everyone was here then. So so I want to just say a few words of thanks, and also a few kind of general words about the themes of the conference as a whole. But then in terms of how we're going to have discussion after that, I'd like to use hand raising as opposed to the chat. I mean, you can still put things in the chat if there are things that if you don't feel that you need to be called on, but you just want to kind of insert something into the conversation. But if you would like to speak, raise your hand. And generally speaking, I will just take people in the order that they raise hands, unless there's something like very pressing that's a direct response to something that someone said. So I'll try to, or we, maybe Leah will be helping out, try to keep an eye on the chat if there are things like that that need to kind of cut in line for just something brief. Otherwise, if you have a sort of longer comment to make or a longer question to ask, use the hand raising function. I'm just going to very quickly, oh yeah, and please mute microphones if when it's not your turn to speak. I'm just going to put a URL in the chat, which is just something that I continue to enjoy, which is an image of the Earth Giants from Frozen 2, a Disney film, which is about the elements and settler colonialism and other things. So I just want to say a few things just to thank very, very warmly our presenters, our moderators, the graduate students who presented, did the collection presentation yesterday, all the organizers, the Newberry, Leah and Becky and Chris. We're very grateful for all your work. Also the Myers Foundations and Northwestern's Mary Jane Crow Symposium Fund for the support, and the department staff, and Roblyn Roth, the department chair. I also want to just, I think it's been said a number of times along the way, but so many of the presentations were recorded, not all, but those that were can be, will be posted on the Newberry's website, I think. And I imagine the chat will not be posted, but if the chats have been saved, and if there are things that you want to go back to, I think it would probably be possible to get those as well, just by asking Leah or someone from the Newberry to send it. I want to just kind of, and I think all of the presenters also, we won't have time to get to everything in these final moments either, but I think all the presenters are open to receiving questions and comments via email. I wanted to see if I could make some connections across the panels there. I mean, there are many connections that have already been made between the papers and the individual panels, and also across the panels. I want to try to pick out a few themes that have moved through the conference as a whole, and then just kind of open up to a few specific questions, but also very open to your kind of comments on topics that you're interested in bringing in. So we've been thinking about the elements not as a kind of static system, right, but as a system of transformations and recombinations, or I mean, maybe we don't even want to say system. It's something that the kind of systematicity keeps getting kind of disrupted, right? So we've been thinking a lot about the dissolution of boundaries, destruction, possibly the relationship of destruction and abstraction. I think the question of abstraction has come up a number of times. It's very interesting. Also, especially early on, and I think this is also true in Maria's talk, the sense of the elements as kind of the weather, or the sort of natural extremes, natural disaster, storm, flood, earthquake, freezing, or natural wonders, right, like the rainbow. That sense of the elements is something you're exposed to, right? As the weather, I think, is something that has come in a number of times. And along with that, and in other ways too, the sense of the challenge that the elements hold to representational conventions in a variety of media. So that was, I think, especially in the first panel, but also first and last panels, I think. Thinking about the medium, the matter of the medium, what does it mean to think horizontally across different material registers. So the material of representation, the represented material, the matter of the body as like a viewer, what it means to be a viewer made of the same stuff that the thing you're seeing is made of, and the thing that you're seeing that's representing something else that's also made of that same matter. So kind of thinking horizontally across these different registers. How does that change art historical methodology or other kinds of methodology, how we think about what it means to see and experience, and all those other senses that we also talked about in terms of consumption, tactility, taste, the relationship of the senses. Other things relating to the body, affect and labor, and the visibility or invisibility of labor, the visibility or invisibility of cultural difference and exploitation, extraction. I think those are all kind of things that we've picked up on a number of times. The idea of the artist's work as a sculpting of the elements and intervention into the elements. And I think that could be extended in thinking more about alchemy and other kinds of transformation. I'm thinking about Jennifer Rampling's comment about the lost element, how we think about both the elements that you see there in the final product, but like what are the elements that have been used and lost along the way. I think that was a really interesting point. Also, I think how we handle confrontations between different systems of knowledge. So the Aristotelian elements or the other kinds of systems of the elements that come from ancient Greek philosophy, how those, how that, you know, how they behave when confronted with other kinds of systems or other ways of producing knowledge, whether it's kind of laborers' knowledge or whether it's Paracelsus and the sort of different take on the elements that he has, or atomic theory, whether it's Lucretius or you know, other kind of nascent atomic theory in the way that Alicia was talking about. The material systems of non-European cultures and what, you know, what happens when Europeans encounter a different way of thinking about the material that's present in Africa or in other parts of the world, in Peru. And then the relationship of natural elements and the ways that they take shape to the supernatural, the demonic, the divine, or I think as especially in Maria's talk, the political. I mean, I think there are moments of the political in a lot of different places, but this sort of specific issue of like this you know, politics of the state as it comes in her reflection on the rainbow. So that's kind of just like a quick overview of a lot of different things, and there's more, obviously. But I thought I might pose a few questions just to start discussion. One would be if people have, you know, thoughts about like unexpected connections that you saw between talks that were, you know, things that you did not expect. And this is for the speakers as well as audience members. And then the other question is about kind of how we might situate this whole set of reflections, this whole set of contributions that have been made to this conference within our own contemporary context. Like what is it that we're thinking about now? Why is it that we're thinking about the elements in this way now? This is something that Lowell alluded to, that Maria also alluded to, I think. And, you know, kind of thinking of whether that means thinking ecologically, thinking about other kinds of political concerns, or just kind of thinking about the historiography of our disciplines, you know, where we are within a trajectory, an intellectual trajectory, and what, you know, how could we characterize what we're doing with the elements in this moment. So those are the sort of, you know, just thinking about unexpected connections, and maybe unexpected connections to our present moment would be another one. I'm looking at the chat, and so I will start. Okay, I see that Bronwyn has a hand up.
Thank you so much for that, Rebecca. And this is really a brief point, but and you kind of referenced it a bit, and as a follow-up to some of the things about representation is, I was struck from a number of the papers, and even thinking about Monica's discussion of the watercolors and that Aldrovandi is using in order to be able to start to think about science. And those of us who've worked with Aldrovandi see how he's actually learning through the images as a part of the process. And it strikes me that there's something that the kind of historiographical dimension, I guess, of our discipline, that experience, embodied and visual experience, is something that sometimes precedes texts. And so that there's a way that actually a lot of the kinds of encounters with phenomena that have been discussed here are kind of working out ideas before they've actually been articulated as theory. And that seems to me a really critical dimension of a number that kind of runs through a number of the papers.
Thank you. Claudia?
Yeah, thank you, Bronwyn. It's so interesting. Just to say, because I think immediately of Paula. I had natural history on my mind, and I'll say something about that in a second. But I think also of Paula Finland's wonderful work from now 30 years ago about experience, experienza, and experimentation in early modern collections. I just wanted to offer two sort of things to think about vis-a-vis this. What are we doing with the elements now, if I can paraphrase your question that way, Rebecca? And one is that I think it's really interesting, compelling, and important that as historians of the early modern world, and a lot of us are art historians, but by no means all of us, that we didn't tread heavily on the subject of materiality, that it came up, but it seems it's sort of, I think of it as a source of illumination for what we were doing, but not the primary subject. And I just think that's interesting, maybe worth talking about, whether, you know, whether we dodged a bullet or whether we found another way through the cave, or I don't know what. And then the other sort of disciplinary thought that I had, and this was where Paula Finland was on my mind, is how many of us have engaged the history of natural history or the history of science. And you know, the elements, as so many of the papers showed so wonderfully, are crucial in and to ways of putting the world in order, right? And so just whether there's something more that anybody wants to say, or just as observations vis-a-vis those two fields, art history and history of science.
Thank you. Monica?
Yes, I kind of I'm connecting with Ronan about the issue of Aldrovandi and the issue of his statements about experience and looking at things with his own eyes. But then, as Leah has shown in a recent article, this is very problematic when he depicts people that he has not seen because they are from the Americas. And I think there is a much more capacious use of the term observatio and experience. Then it's a bit like the experiment and experiencia and experimentum. It's a similar slippage, I think, that it's much more capacious than we sometimes intend it to be or interpret it to be in the modern context. So my sense is he does use these terms, but he also reads books and visualizes things, and he kind of, the two things are very much interlinked and not against one another as we would expect, but actually working together in a synergy to then create something. And the imagination is something that is still very important for this generation of even natural philosophers, that actually is a premium, is not like in the Enlightenment, something that brings in, you know, fantasy and is problematic. Is actually something creative but also constructive to thinking, even in the sciences.
Thank you. Christopher?
Yeah, that was a great response and summary, Rebecca. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody. My question is very short. It's simply about teaching. Those of us who are really lucky enough to be employed as pedagogues of some sort in museums or elsewhere or universities, I'm thinking how one might use this kind of conversation as a way to think about how we discuss or how we imagine the discipline of not art history, but how we imagine that basically are jobs in a really formal way in talking about matter. Now, if there's something that changes in if both Maria's wonderful political ending and everyone's conversations on matter are the standard understandings of how one talks about not just art history, but about matter in relationship to this, or the history of science, how have they changed now? I'm wondering if you know there's something we can say about that. That's all.
I might try to
Yeah, no.
I might try not to. I'm not really trying to answer it, but just kind of to throw something into dialogue with it, which is there's a volume that came out in 2020 from University of Amsterdam Press called Early Modern Ecologie, which is about the French Renaissance and eco-critical thinking. And there's a kind of introductory essay in it by Hassan Melahi, where he talks about the relationship of theory to the material of our disciplines, and trying to think about, again, like this is, I'll use this term horizontal again, like trying to think more horizontally about the relationship between theory and you know, historical material, where it's not an I mean, this is, you know, this is something many of us have heard and said too, that, you know, it's not a matter of kind of theory just being taken and applied wholesale and kind of dominating the material, but thinking about the material kind of speaking back, so that the sense of like ways of constructing intellectual practices that also kind of observe that kind of horizontality of theory and history might, you know, that might be one way of thinking about it. I'm not sure if that's directly answering your question, but like it just kind of sparked that reference for me.
No, it does. My question is simply, it's again thinking about Maria's talk. Does the political understanding of what is matter and what is formative, what is content, does it change our understanding of how we imagine teaching now? That's all. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, I guess the extension of what I was saying was, you know, maybe that's about like the relationship of teacher and student also, like that we're, you know, thinking not that we are kind of shaping this unformed matter into something that's like beautiful, right? But that it's also shaping us, that our students are shaping us, and like to acknowledge the contributions that students make in a more kind of substantive way. I'll let it go. Like, matter has traditionally been seen as a retreat from politics, but it is the most political thing one can do. So okay, now I see. I think I see more clearly. That's very great question and provocative. I'll go to Christine. Yeah. Oh, you're still muted, Christine.
I couldn't find you. So thank you very much. Just following up on that, I think a shared theme was also landscape, and in fact the porous landscape, sort of the shaping of landscape, but also how we are shaped by landscape. And there were so many different landscapes: primordial, final, rockscape, seascapes. And landscapes turned upside down, landscapes that change horizontally or vertically. And I do think it's a shared topic, and also a topic that relates very much to our time, in fact.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, definitely landscape, an important theme. I have Monica next. Or was your hand just not?
No, yeah, that's fine. But
okay.
Sorry if Maria was first. Maria, do you want to go?
Okay,
first?
Maria, I have. So yeah, I'm seeing them in a certain order, but so okay, Maria, yeah.
I'll make it short. I just wanted to respond quickly to Christopher's point about pedagogy. You know, for many of us, well, for some of you, you might teach students who are already engaged with the Renaissance, let's just say. Whereas many of us, I'm sure, have to struggle quite a bit to convince students to come over to you know, see our fantastic set of things. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is that there is a particular kind of ecological model in teaching that isn't about eco-criticism per se, about the kind of theoretical engagement with eco-criticism, but to think about history as an ecological thing in and of itself, that what we are doing is looking at the past, gathering together the bits of the past and trying to upcycle it into something that is relevant now and that speaks to young students now so that they can make better sense of how to negotiate the here and now. And this made me think also back to what that wonderful point that Bronwyn made about kind of temporality, about being able to envision what has not yet come. And isn't that what art is capable of doing? It is always avant la lettre, right? It's always before the text, because it is able to envision a world that is, hopefully a better world, a more utopic world. And through abstraction, through art, is one of the ways of exploring or kind of, visualizing the possibilities and the potentialities of what might be accomplished. And just very briefly, so I'll get out of here, I don't want to talk too long. I found it very moving, I suppose, and also a kind of certain moment of now that in the last year, 2 volumes in our field have come out with green worlds. Somewhere in the title, there's Judy Cranston's book on green worlds in Renaissance Venice, and the edited volume that April Oettinger and Karen Goodchild put out. I think that was also last year. So there are certain themes that both fit the content of what we study, but also the form in which we can deliver it. So I don't want, on the other side of coronavirus, I don't want us to be crisis addicts about our field, because students are actually very interested. We just have to convince our modernist colleagues. But there are times, here too, so.
So I'm not exactly sure. Monica, did you have a new comment, or was that?
Yeah, I have a new comment that links.
Okay, why don't you go ahead, and then I'll go to Jim and then
very
Lowell.
briefly again, a kind of comment that links what Christopher was saying and also what Maria was saying with Christine's comment about landscape. That's become a kind of a bit of an obsession of mine in teaching as well. So I taught a course this year about landscapes of science, and students were actually writing papers about places around where they lived. So I had one writing about salt mines in Sardinia, and somebody else about the kind of landscape in the Apennines near Reggio Emilia. So they kind of, it helps me also think about the way I grew up in a city and in a kind of rather urbanized environment, and this is fairly new in a way for generations before us. And so it kind of made me think about my own subject in relation to a very different way of life, where nature was much closer to us and much more present and observed and lived through in a way that we don't anymore, because everything is mediated by technology and cityscapes and so on and so forth.
Great, thank you. So next, Jim.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'd have 2 very brief comments. One is that the primeval unformed matter, especially as it's a mix of precipitants and oily stuff and things like that, is sometimes referred to as the scum of nature. I don't know if you want to share that with your students as you're talking about forming them in some way or not. So that's one thing. The other thing about why anyone is interested in the 4 elements, and I don't know that this has anything to do with scholars, but its appearance, as you've pointed out, in popular culture, particularly for children, but not necessarily, because it shows up other places as well, in Frozen 2 and Avatar: The Last Airbender and so forth. It's all about power on the one hand, that somehow or another one can tap into these things, but I think it's also about the power comes from a simplification of things, and so one is able to use this power by a concentration on these 4 things, without the distraction of other things, without the mixture of other. It's about the purity of them in some sense.
Thank you, Lowell.
Yeah, let me just lower my hand. Hopefully this will all come through coherently, but yeah, I mean, so Rebecca, like, thanks a lot for your comments, and Chris, like the question about pedagogy. I mean, it's really hard, right? I mean, I teach literature. I've taught classes on water and literature. I've taught a grad course on weathering. I'm teaching one in the fall on the blue humanities. And I think like one of the things that I try to do to try to kind of break out of that, some of these older models, is kind of what like all of us have done like in the last 2 days. I just tell my students, like, follow the element, right? Companion it, see where it takes you. And I admittedly, like, a lot of them are very hesitant because they kind of expect to, to be taught kind of the quadcameral method, right? Here's water, here's fire, here's earth, right? And they kind of come at it from an approach of sort of like, of mastery almost. Like, I want to figure out like where it was, what it did, and then I can kind of come away with it. And it's really hard to kind of break out of that. And kind of going to that question about why is it important? Well, one of the things I try to do is I try to link it with as many disciplines as I can, right? So in my weathering class, I had a Shinnecock artist. Her name's Courtney Leonard. She came to my class. We looked at her art. She sat down and gave a presentation and said, I'm here to talk to you about my reservation on Long Island, the materiality of which is literally disappearing, right? And it was just like art and climate change. We met with a landscape architect. It's like, how do we design for futures that we know are going to be flooded? Right? We met with someone who works in the disaster center that we have here. It's like, how do we plan for climate refugees on the East Coast? And so I guess all this is to say that I think, and maybe this is kind of sort of sounding more like a pep talk, but I think like this is what we do, right? We speak to other people,
Oh no. Lowell, are you still there?
Lowell, you're inspiring me, Lowell. Come on, you gotta bring it, man. Come on. Lowell, I'm feeling happy.
Oh no. Oh wait.
I don't know.
We lost Lowell. We lost you just as you were saying we speak to other people.
Oh, sorry.
You staggered there for a minute. Say what you give us the last 30 seconds of what you just said.
Okay, so it was basically like it was really quick. It was basically like I think we do what we just did in the last 2 days. We speak to other people. We try to broaden the conversation in ways that just encourage us to take risks and to experiment and to fail, right, and to slip up. And we try to model that for our students, too, right? And I think that's the way that the elements stay kind of relevant and they stay sort of pertinent to whatever that we're talking about, right? Because we're just making those openings and we're creating more and more and more questions and more connections, right? So I don't know if any of that made sense, but this is also my way of kind of just, thanking everyone as well, right?
It made complete sense. And I don't want to step on anyone's late, but this conference has been so seized upon elements that are organic, and there's many elements that are synthetic that were made. So that's kind of what you're speaking to, is that promise.
I want to point us to the ASCII art that's appearing in the chat. the owl.
Oh yeah.
But Sophie, do you want to because we don't have, I don't think we have a hand up right now. So maybe Sophie, you'd like to say your piece. No, well,
oh, I was afraid of that. No, I guess I just have been trying to think about, in particular, the role of museums and that kind of pedagogy, and this like the decolonizing of history and how the elements can lead us there. And I think everyone's papers have touched on that in a certain way. And so, yeah, so I think all the things that everyone's been saying about a generational shift is that there feels, you know, there really is like a palpable sense of a younger generation having a really different relationship to history, or what they will need from history. And working in it, I work at the V&A, and working in a museum like the V&A that has this huge colonial history to deal with, I guess in the sense of like there is something impending that is coming, like environmental change is something that, you know, is happening and will come. And also, like for them in the museums will become obsolete, right, if they don't change to respond to this need for what history has to provide. Like a younger generation will just stop going to museums. So yeah, I guess that I was just kind of thinking about that with Jim's point about power and diversity, and the need for the elements to lead us somewhere to help us with those challenges.
Yeah, Ingrid.
Yeah, I think Sophie is right on. And just to add to that, with the experience of museums, I think shows like Caravans of Gold and Sahel have helped to highlight maybe how the elements have an effect on the preservation of objects, which in turn have a really dramatic effect on the kinds of art historical narratives that we tell. And so the more that museums and we as teachers can do to talk about preservation of materials and fragmentation and you know, the way that the elements interact with history and the kind of canons that we form as a result of that. And you know, I think that's something that can be changed with discussions like this. So I really appreciate everyone's papers. And also just to add, the mining and extraction papers really are helping me to think through how anthills are a form of labor, a sort of non-visible labor from the human perspective for most of the time. But at a certain point, humans start paying attention, or Westerners in Africa start paying attention to that labor. And I can't help but connect it to idealizations coming probably from Aristotle about the nature of political organization and hierarchy and smoothly run human systems, and how those apply to animal systems as well. And the slave trade fits in with topics like consumption too. So thanks, everyone.
Just to respond to something that you just said, Ingrid, you brought up the question of preservation, but I also feel like in your talk in particular kind of called preservation into question in certain ways. So like what, you know, that this is like a contested issue, right? And yeah, that in terms of like certain practices, preservation might not have been the point, right? And this is true. This is as true exactly of like contemporary Western art as it is true of like, you know, art from many other times and places. And so that's, yeah, that's just kind of interesting to think about, like that. I mean, in some ways, you know, you don't want to like valorize destruction and then have that destruction be carried out in ways that are you know, that are invidious and inequitable and like harm the very people, you know, who have already been harmed, right? But yeah, thinking about the kind of the relationship of production and destruction is really interesting, and but also very potentially politically charged.
Yes, and I think also in teaching African arts, that's something that is, you know, needs to be addressed right away, because students come in with an expectation of what African art looks like, and that comes entirely from the art that's preserved from the 19th and 20th century from colonial collecting. So again, it's connected to Western ideas and Western tastes in a way, which of course had an effect on material production in Africa. And I think it's Zoe Struthers who has an article on Pende practices where ritually masks that were danced for initiation ceremonies were destroyed. But once there was a market for these in the West, they stopped being destroyed. And so they were preserved. And so the way that the market even itself informs preservation, where what we think of as the traditional practice would have involved destruction through fire, completely shifts.
So these are really generative thoughts. I don't see any hands currently. If people want to jump in, if it potentially include, to contribute to this kind of broader discussion, or if there's particular points that didn't get addressed in some of the Q&As that you want to bring back in. Claudia, I think, has a hand up. Yeah. Sorry, I've really reached the end of my tether. Turn off my video instead of on my microphone. I just, and as in the chat, I've just come to the point where I'm just shouting out anything that's of interest. But I do think that one of the issues that came up a number of times, and so one of the themes, bingo, is labor, and maybe, as I said, as much as labor, the relationship between the human and the elements, and that, of course, takes us right into sort of considerations on the Anthropocene. But I also wanted to talk about, or I just wanted to raise the sort of dynamics like danger, and sort of, that was one of the things so danger, risk, and that's as much, the risk of falling off the iceberg if you don't know how to swim, as it is the risk of losing control over the elements, or the risk of the elements controlling you. And I just thought I would shout that out. I just give a shout out to danger and risk. And also secrets and discoveries. That was another thing that sort of came up over and over again. But
Rebecca, maybe since nobody's hands up, and I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand there all of a sudden. This issue of danger is interesting, and the idea of the relationship between human beings and the elements as something that is antagonistic. And one of the things that is interesting about climate change and the alarm about climate change to me, particularly where I live, is that one of the things that has been demonstrated by recent hurricanes, among many other things, is that in the extraordinary power of nature. I mean, it's just, it really kind of, the mind really boggles at it if you see it up close. And the idea that it can't be controlled, and yet what it is spurring, what we hope that it spurs, are efforts to control it, both through the building of dikes, for example, which they're sort of multi-billion dollar projects to build dikes, build a dike here close to Houston, but just in general, the efforts that we are trying to make to keep the temperatures from rising. It's still it's a perennial effort to control nature at the same time that we are perennially reminded that we cannot, in some sense. I'm not saying that we shouldn't try, but it's this kind of antagonistic. I mean, even as we talk about loving nature and the country's national parks, which are the jewel of the country, and want to preserve nature and so forth and the beauty of it, at the same time we maintain this a really quite antagonistic relationship to nature. One thing I think is interesting is that we,
we haven't really, I don't think we've talked about infectiousness, right? In the context of a pandemic, that, you know, it would have been, I mean, I can imagine that might have been something that, I mean, maybe we talked about a little bit about miasmas, or, you know, that something we could have talked about would have been the sort of, the kind of question of effects on the body, right, of nature, and, you know, in various ways. I'm losing my earplugs, earpieces, and, you know, and that because of contemporary politics in the US, that also brings me to the demonic, and like the idea that, you know, that there are people running around thinking that vaccines like basically turn you into a witch, or you have the mark of the beast if you have the vaccine, or something like that. The sort of like how, you know, thinking about like how we understand things in nature that we can't see, that such that like you could like not believe in coronavirus and yet believe that the vaccine has this kind of invisible effect that's pernicious, right? Monica.
Sorry, I'm kind of saying something again. So about what you were saying about the body, I think it's very interesting, partly because Aldovrandi makes some comments about metals and minerals being transformed, and the metaphors are often with the stomach and the heat of the body changing things. And also there was this idea that some of the stones that could be produced, like chelidonium, I think it was chelidonium, that are produced by birds within their bodies through heat and transformation of that sort. But also I'm going back to kind of the idea that in the 16th century, in particular, Hippocrates' air, water, and places gets rediscovered. And this idea that your environment really makes your body so permeable to change. And so if you don't live in a stable, harmonious environment, and Naples was considered to be a good place to live, with the exceptions of the volcanoes, the rafting, but generally speaking was considered to be a temperate climate. And then there are issues of climates also when they go to the Americas, and how the body is affected by this. So I think that again is the elements working through your body and changing it.
Yeah, I mean,
thank you. Lowell, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I would just say really quick. I mean, I think I mentioned this in the chat for Chris's talk. But yeah, like, you know, like black lung, right? And that brings together sort of the geological and the ontological. The elements are you, right? In those instances, but not even with black lung. It's like most of us are water, right? So where does the human starts and water end, or water start in the human end? And you know, James, I love how you kind of did a little like shout out to Empedocles, like at the end there, because you know he's my man, right? It's the elements are always in combination, but they're held together by love, and they're torn apart by strife, right? And that's the force that's constantly like twisting them and twisting them and twisting them. And that's where you are, right? And if that's you, like physically, ontologically, that is a much different position to be in than to think like, how do we figure this out? How do we stabilize it? It leads to those kinds of questions that, like Chris, you were saying, like, how do we just keep pointing out how this really is a political question, how certain bodies are more exposed than others, right? That more bodies are at risk than others, right? But you know, just disabusing ourselves of that idea that, you know, at some point we're going to get sustainable, some point we're going to get harmony or equilibrium. It's really, really hard, right? But yeah, anyway, that's why I'm glad we're doing this. Back to the pep talk. But yeah.
Are we winding down? Maybe.
Thanks for that, Lowell. That was kind.
Yeah.
That was kind. That was very kind.
I think we may be getting tired at this point now. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in.
I'm
Well, I know. Oh,
I'll just say really quickly, like just building off of Chris's original question, let me know if there's anything the Center for Renaissance Studies can do. What is our role in this world? How can we help undergrads, grads? Just putting that out there. I welcome your thoughts on that too. Not to discuss right now necessarily if we're too tired, but just keep that in mind.
And I just want to add a little shout out, since we're talking about pedagogy, that the Newberry Library has a fantastic resource for students, the digital collections for the classroom, which is a set of just terrific brief essays based on primary sources in the collection of the Newberry about a range of themes. And maybe soon there will be some on the elements as well, who knows, but it's really, really worth checking out for your students, written by young scholars, I think, by and large, people at the Newberry. So.
Yeah, we'd welcome contributions to this. And also I should note, we're going to be hosting our first undergrad course in the fall. It's sort of an experimental class online. We're hoping to do more in the future. So keep that in mind as well. Had a huge response, so it's pretty exciting.
well, I think maybe with that, we can hang out a little bit longer if there are specific questions that anyone wants to pose to particular speakers. I know there are some questions that we didn't have a chance to get to in the different Q&As, but maybe as in terms of like the convening as a whole, we can come to a close. Just thank everyone again. Thank you so much to the audience for all your great questions and for being here. And thank you to the speakers, the moderators, organizers, Newberry Library, everything. I've really enjoyed this. I've learned a lot, and I hope these conversations will continue. I mean, I know these conversations will continue, but I encourage everyone to join in and send, if you have additional thoughts and questions, let us know.
Just thank you guys again, the organizers. It was really fantastic. And it was such a pleasure to see so many of you here, and I look forward to continuing this, but especially to all of you who put so much work into organizing this over and over. It was such a productive experience on so many levels. So thank you. I'm sure that goes for many people.
Just wanted to say that clearly the theme is capturing the attention of a wider audience. So I'm kind of thinking that this has opened up a very productive line of research, because the number of people that attended is clearly indicating a desire to hear about this, but probably they have something to say as well. So it's really nice.
And wow, thank you to all the speakers for really holding to those of you. I mean, Christine, of course, you had the keynote, but really holding to the 10-minute time limit, that was amazing. And I think it made it really possible to have this kind of, broad reaching and deep discussion. It was so great to meet some of you, to see others of you again. It was really terrific. Yeah.
Speakers did an amazing job of packing, packing their material into 10 minutes without ever making it feel like it was like overly dense. I think it was amazing.
It was quite a challenge. I have to say, I've not ever before been asked to give a 10-minute paper, and I think that's the secret, because if you give too much detail, it gets really dense very quickly. Yeah, but it was very useful, and also reminds me of what I'm asking my students to do, which is really good as well as a good reminder. Well, I hope to see you all in Europe soon, all vaccinated, and, even if it's behind a mask, but hopefully by the autumn, things will look a little bit better in Europe as well, as we slowly get vaccinated. With whatever we can get at the moment. But yeah, I hope that you'll be able to come over soon.
Yeah, that would be so nice. I would really be looking forward. That would be great. North or south of the Alps.
Yes, exactly.
I look forward to hugging everybody.
Well, I mean, I think Italy is doing better than the Netherlands and Switzerland in terms of accents. Christine, come over.
No, but it's now getting better. It's now getting better.
That's good because I've
Yeah.
And
being
Marika
considered.
Kiblushek told me that she has an appointment for her vaccine now. So I don't know, Machtelt, if you also do, but it seems to be, it's
moving.
moving. Yeah.
It's really getting better.
I think it was really the doses that were not enough at the beginning. You know, there was a shortage. So in Italy, they expected more vaccine, but there were, and also the embargoes of certain countries as well. And now things are kind of opening up. So
no, but definitely Italy was much quicker.
Well, it wasn't really for everybody, so we got hammered because teachers were vaccinated before the people in their 70s. So there was a lot of bad blood going around with people saying that we stole the vaccines.
Yes, but we got them before AstraZeneca was only for people over 50 or under 50 in Italy for a few weeks, and that's when we got in.
Exactly.
It's okay.
To the line.
It's okay with vaccine distribution. It's like when you're waiting for a table to open up at a restaurant and you're in the queue and you're just standing there with impatience and anger and frustration at the people who are sitting down. And the second you sit down, the second the waiter or waitress says, you come, you're like, oh my God. And then, as soon as you sit down, we've all done this, and you kind of look back, like, those people on the line. I mean, you just forget and it disappears. So I'm sure the anger they might have felt early on will very quickly disappear as soon as they get vaccinated as well. So I mean, that's temporality, right?
Anyway, I'm going to say goodbye because I think the kids are already in bed. They cheered when I got out during the break, but I managed to get back in. You know how they kind of stick to your legs and you have to drag them. So it has been lovely, and we'll be in touch soon. So ciao, Ingrid. I hope to see you before you go.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.